Well, can you describe the work you did at the Hercules plant?
Well, originally when I started here, they put me on what they called a rigging crew, which consisted of any of the rigging work, moving whatever. Plus, you had to maintain the railroad that they had, a narrow gauge railroad. And then I went in service. When I got out, I guess it was in 45. After about six months or less, I don't remember the exact amount of time, they made me a foreman of the crew. And they had bidding, you know. When I went in the service, there wasn't any union, and when I came out, there was. So then you had supposed to bid on the jobs, and your seniority, more or less, determined whether you got it or not.
What year did you start working?
Early part of 42. I don't remember the exact date, but.
And that was before you went into the service?
Yes.
You mentioned that narrow gauge railroad. Can you elaborate a little bit on that railroad, where it went? And I understand that
well, that was one of the major means of moving things around, because you didn't have, roads didn't go too far. In other words, this road that went around the plant was mainly for, during the war, they had guards. That was a guard shack. And they used to patrol it on motorcycles. They had, first they had one with without the sidecar. It was set up for a sidecar, but without the sidecar. And they were having a little trouble with those, with the guys tipping them over, so then they got three-wheel type Harley Davidsons. The others were four-cylinder Indians. And so there really wasn't too many roads other than directly to a place like out in the Black Powder. There would be a road that went back through the hills, back where the Hercules town is more or less now. And so in order to move things easier, not so far, they had this railroad that went pretty much all over. They went to all the buildings, and of course they had places where they stored the powder. You know, well, I can't think of any.
Why did they have those buildings so far away from everything here?
When?
Why? Do you know?
Well, in case of an explosion, they didn't want to have everything too close. The worst one was the MG line, which is right over here, right past that eucalyptus tree. And you know, when that would go, it would really do a lot of damage. Although they had MG for the powder, so they'd have trying to think of the building where they'd have a cart that they wheeled this NG in, and they had platforms. In other words, the walkway that they pushed this cart on was elevated up pretty high, and they pushed this NG to the house. I can't remember the building that where the MG was run down into this building. Then they would fill these carts from there and then push them around to the different houses. They call them. They had different names for the different houses where they mixed the dynamite. They had a certain percentage for the different strengths of dynamite. So I have a problem with nose on here. But the black powder was out about, I think it was 7 miles back, way back up in there. And of course, the powder line, the railroad ran up to there too. But it was pretty elaborate. There wasn't much of the area that you could drive, in other words, with a vehicle, except for around this road and just down in the general area here around the buildings.
So the railroad was very important then,
Yeah,
to that.
They had jitneys, they called them electric jitneys, that they used pretty much for the powder. I had a locomotive, little engine on the rigging crew, and we had our own cars, flat cars, and tool cars. I used it every day, for everything. And they were little engine-driven ones, but the ones in the powder line were all electric or rechargeable. They had battery packs. They recharged them every night.
Someone said something about that they had air locomotives. Do you recall that?
That was before my time. I heard that too, but they weren't here during my time.
I see.
But I do remember something about that you mentioned.
What about the medical facilities they had here? Do you recall what they had for, in case somebody got injured or sick on the job?
Well, they always had a nurse on duty. And then they also had a doctor that came in, I don't remember just how many times a week. Whether it was just once a week or several times a week, I don't remember that part of it, but they always had a doctor.
What about if somebody had to go to the hospital? Where would they take those people?
I don't remember too much about, they just call an ambulance where, I don't remember now, but that was usually handled by the nurse, and they'd probably contact this doctor. I can't remember his name now.
Okay, on another subject, a nicer subject maybe, do you remember much about the social life of the employees here, what they would do after hours up here at the club, or any other social events that would be held by the company?
Well, they had a Hercules Club, men's club, and they'd have, I don't remember exactly how many, but 7 or 8 things, different feeds and whatnot. And then of course you had the bowling alley all the time, and they had pool tables. Mostly that's what you're talking about. Like for evenings, the guys would be playing pool, or during lunch hour, a lot of regulars would play pool. And they'd have, I don't remember if they taught any dances. Of course, they had the bowling down, below, and that you could sign up for.
Do you remember anything about that big house that the superintendent lived in, the white columns that was over that way?
Well, when I came here, there was a big house here, right where that palm tree is. And I think that was like a hotel. I think at one time they had rented out rooms or whatever. But I tried to think that the superintendent's house, I don't remember any big columns or anything.
Well,
it's still there.
Now, the house is gone. The steps are there, but anyway, that's...
I looked over there. I thought I saw the building there yet.
Were there any other buildings that were of importance that you remember around here that perhaps aren't here anymore?
Well, they had a clubhouse about halfway up the hill here too, on the right. It's gone now, and I'm trying to think. I guess different organizations that leased it or whatever. Some of the guys belonged to it, but it wasn't, you didn't have to be an employee, in other words, to belong to it.
What about, did you grow up in Hercules?
No, I started working at Hercules when I was about 19, I guess.
Where did you live?
While I was working here, and then?
Or up until that time?
Well, I came from down Salinas.
Okay, and then you lived in Hercules when you worked here, though?
I lived here for a year or two, at the end, near the end. About 2 years, I guess.
Do you remember any particularly interesting or memorable things that happened while you were here that you could tell us about that I haven't asked you about?
Well, one thing I was going to mention that talking about the doctors for the office there, for the nurse. One of the doctors that when I first came here was Dr. Fernandez. That has where that Fernandez mansion is down on 10th there at the end. He was the one that they had then. And I guess he must have. I think when I came back from the service, why I don't think he either was gone and died already or whatever. I don't remember that part of it. But I can't think of anything spectacular, but out of the explosions.
Oh, they were spectacular. How about, do you remember hearing anything about the Chinese workers that used to work here?
Oh, yeah. I've heard a lot about them. In fact, where their living quarters was right over by those eucalyptus trees, right directly through by that palm tree, and about where I'm pointing over there, just about where you.
Were any of them still here when you started working?
No. No, they had. In fact, I've got some of the opium bottles. They had little bottles about that tall, a glass bottle, and they were sealed in glass. They just break the top off of them. And there was a lot of rice bowls. In fact, I guess even now you could go over there with a shovel and dig up all kinds of stuff. We just would pick up the stuff occasionally, but we never really got into it. But there was all kinds of stuff there. But what I've read and heard quite a bit about it, but it was a pretty rough deal, I guess, for them because they were more like slaves, I guess, than anything else. They'd pretty much take whatever they had in earnings, for the board and food and things like that. And they wasn't too much of a life, but that's about all I know about it.
Well, thank you very much. That in itself is interesting. It was nice to hear about the opium bottles and all that. I wonder if we have any of those in the museum.
If you want one, I'll bring you one.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful if you could spare one. Yep.
Okay.
All finished.